If you want to build a restaurant at the end of the universe, and you would like to know if you can already acquire a piece of land in a distant planet, first read the Outer Space Treaty in order to learn if your transaction is legal. My name is Marta Mejía-Kaiser, and I'm going to introduce you to property claims in outer space. I name this presentation after the book by Douglas Adams, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Few months after the first artificial satellite was launched into orbit, in the middle of the Cold War, the representatives of governments from various countries met at the United Nations for negotiations to establish general legal principles for space activities. In this forum, the Outer Space Treaty was drafted. It was opened for signature and entered into force in 1967. This legal document sought to address urgent concerns, such as prohibiting the placing of weapons of mass destruction in outer space, assisting astronauts in emergencies, and compensation for damages in the event of accidents during a rocket launch. However, the negotiators of the Outer Space Treaty could at that time not foresee all future technological developments and new space activities. I am going to refer here to one of these questions. Once upon a time, there was a small boat that reached the beach of an island. The navigators confirmed that the island was not inhabited, so they decided to appropriate it, personally. This story is a true tale, because international law does not recognize property titles made by individuals in a personal capacity over territories that do not belong to anyone. Individuals can only declare property over discovered territories in the name of a state, if that state gives them authorization. The acquisition of new territories by states is based on a norm of custom of public international law, with binding force for all, which indicates that states can claim sovereignty over territories that do not belong to anyone, the famous terra nullius. In order to acquire new territory, in ancient times it was enough to follow a certain ritual. For example, the representative of a sovereign had to touch the new territory with his hand, had to step on that territory, or had to plant a flag. But the rules that form the norm of acquiring new territories have changed. Today, the government of a state needs to communicate to the international community its intentions to possess a new territory and demonstrate that it can exercise sovereignty over such territory through effective control. You can imagine that after the discovery of America and the subsequent appropriation of terra nullius by various states of vast continental areas and innumerable islands in all the oceans, the day came when no new territories were left. At that moment, this international customary norm fell asleep. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first satellite into space. Shortly thereafter, the United States also began launching satellites. All these events suggested that a path was open into the direction of the moon. The leaders of both countries feared that their competitors sent a spacecraft to the moon, crew members set their feet on the lunar soil, and started a sequence of events that could lead to the proclamation of sovereignty over the moon, totally in accordance with international customary law, because at that time, the moon did not belong to anyone. The United States and the Soviet Union feared that the dormant norm of international custom will be awakened and a race will begin to appropriate all the planets of our solar system, and even the orbital space around our planet. Such a situation would have closed the doors of space to almost all humankind. Lyndon B. Johnson, Vice President of the United States at the time when the Soviet Union sent the first human into space, commented, "I, for one, don't want to go to sleep by the light of a communist moon." Out of the fear that the adversary will be the first to arrive, The representatives of the Soviet Union, the United States, and other countries decided to meet for negotiation. They agreed to Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, by which they accept that outer space, including the Moon and the other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. With the acceptance of this norm, outer space, including the Moon and the other celestial bodies, was declared as res communis, that is, they belong to all of us. This treaty came into force just in time, 2 years before the first astronauts arrived on the Moon. The treaty has been ratified by more than 100 countries who agreed to comply with this obligation. But despite this principle, statements have already emerged from private persons who claim to be owners of celestial bodies. During the era of settlement of the Wild West of the United States, legislation was created that allowed people to register and acquire land, unless it was not claimed by others. In 1980, a U.S. national looked at the Moon and wondered if it already belonged to someone. Considering the legislation of his country, he sent letters to the United Nations, the United States government, and the Embassy of the Soviet Union, notifying his intentions to obtain land property on the Moon. As he received no reply, he considered that he had the right to appropriate this celestial body. This person created a company through which he sells land on the Moon. The business grew so much that subsidiaries were created in other countries, and land from other celestial bodies began to be sold. This U.S. national declares that he is the only one authorized to sell these properties, and he threatens to initiate legal action against people who intend to do the same. This person argues that the Outer Space Treaty only applies to governments, but not to private persons. He considers not to be bound by the non-appropriation principle. Although Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty does not mention the term government, it is understood that the treaty is directed to set obligations among the state parties, and states are not abstract entities. 30 years earlier, the philosopher and jurist Hans Kelsen considered in his book General Theory of Law and the State that if international law should not obligate and authorize individuals, the obligations and rights stipulated by international law will not have content at all, and international law will not obligate or authorize anybody to do anything. In short, the human being is the end user of international law, including treaties. The claims of ownership of the Moon and other celestial bodies made by this U.S. national have been challenged by other people doing the same business. Although they have given him some headache, there has been no judicial decision to clarify his situation. But now, I want to mention another case. When we entered the global age of the Internet, someone created a website to serve as registry for space private property rights. Another U.S. national recorded at this website many celestial bodies, among which is the asteroid Eros. It so happened that this asteroid was selected by the United States Space Agency, NASA, for the landing of a space probe in 2001. The moment the media reported about the successful landing of this probe, the U.S. national sent an invoice to NASA of $20 for parking and storage of the space probe on his property. Because NASA did not pay, this person initiated legal proceedings against NASA in the District Court of Nevada. In 2004, the Nevada court ruled that such proprietary claims on the asteroid were invalid. In the same year, this person submitted this case to the Court of Appeals in San Francisco, where he lost again. The main reasons given by this court were that this person had not been able to demonstrate what authority and legislation recognized his property rights outside the territory of the United States, and that the United States had ratified the Outer Space Treaty, accepting the prohibition of claims of sovereignty and appropriation, including nationals. As this person was a national of the United States, such international legislation then applied to him. There are many curious cases of private individuals and companies trying to make money from this type of activities. But there are also countries that have challenged the non-appropriation principle and have made claims of sovereignty in outer space. Before I go on, I first need to tell you which region of space was disputed. There are two areas around our planet that are heavily used. One of them is where the low Earth orbits are, here in red. The other orbital region is ring-shaped and is about 36,000 kilometers from the Earth, here in green and blue. This region is located exactly above the Earth's equator. By orbital dynamics, the satellites in this region move in harmony with the rotation of our planet. They appear to be parked over a point on the Earth's equator. This region is used by industry providing telecommunications and meteorological services. Satellites positioned here need to have a certain separation, as not to cause harmful electromagnetic interference with their signals. In the framework of the International Telecommunication Union, countries coordinate with each other who and where a satellite is stationed. As years go by, this orbit is getting crowded and coordination becomes more difficult. Faced with this situation, in 1976, 8 equatorial countries declared that they have sovereignty over the segments of this orbit above their territories. They argue that their territory extended up to 36,000 kilometers of altitude and that this area was not in outer space. These national declarations were long debated in the United Nations, but little by little, several of these countries abandoned their sovereignty claims and instead demanded equitable access to this region. Only Colombia and Ecuador continue to maintain this position and have even introduced these sovereignty claims into their national constitutions. Despite the fact that it is publicly known which countries have satellites in the orbital segments above their territories, Colombia and Ecuador have not taken action against the operators of such satellites. They even allow subsidiary companies of these satellite operators to register in their territories and contract the services of those space systems. Colombia and Ecuador are caught in a dilemma. They allege that these segments are part of their territory, but they know if they try to exercise effective control in these segments by taking measures against foreign satellite operators, it will backfire and harm the telecommunication services to their nationals. New space activities in low Earth orbits are also being disputed. In recent years, private companies have been launching satellites into low Earth orbits to form part of what are called large constellations, for the purpose of providing commercial internet services to the entire planet. Before, the increase of operational satellites was more or less constant. A few satellites were orbited per year. In 2019, there were a total of about 2,000 satellites in this region. Now, this rate of increase has changed. The number of satellites in low Earth orbits is expected to increase dramatically in the next 10 years, from 2,000 to about 60,000 operating satellites. To avoid collisions, evasive maneuvers will become necessary and frequent and consume fuel. When the fuel of these satellites will be used up, the satellites will move out of the orbital path and commercial profits will no longer be achieved. The companies that own such constellations are already beginning to accuse each other of putting their satellites too close to theirs, sometimes ignoring coordination calls when one of the satellites is in imminent danger of collision. Some of these companies claim to have come first and to hold more rights in such orbits. In the absence of proper space traffic rules, the law of the jungle will start to apply in this area. If an operator does not move its satellite on collision course to demonstrate his supremacy, he risks a collision with catastrophic consequences. A satellite collision can trigger follow-on collisions in a cascade effect, known as Kessler syndrome. You may have seen the movie Gravity, which shows the resulting effects. As soon as such a cascade effect occurs with objects larger than 10 centimeters in size, most likely to start in low Earth orbits, such a region will be considered as unusable. We will lose part of the telecommunication services and near-Earth observation images. The promised Internet service using a network of satellites in low Earth orbits will not be possible. And even the International Space Station will have to be evacuated. Due to the elbowing of some private companies, we are about to lose this valuable portion of space. But now, I move farther into outer space. Considering new activities in space, some countries are beginning to reinterpret the principle of non-appropriation of space. After the entry into force of the Outer Space Treaty, the Soviet Union and the United States managed to bring to Earth several kilograms of rocks from the Moon for scientific studies. The enormous efforts required and the high financial cost of these missions did not encourage an immediate exploitation of natural resources from outside of our planet. However, a few years ago, private companies announced plans to extract natural resources from asteroids, to bring them to Earth and sell them. The question arose as to whether the prohibition of acquiring property in space also applied to the extraction of natural resources. To legalize the status of companies that intend to undertake such activities, in 2015, the United States adopted a law by which it allows U.S. citizens to own and sell natural resources obtained from asteroids. A definition of this legislation clarifies that the term space resource means an abiotic resource in situ in outer space, which means that no person or private company can appropriate extraterrestrial life forms, if found. Luxembourg also adopted legislation stating that the space resources are likely to be appropriated and that people need government authorization to exploit and use such resources. These two national laws are discussed controversially. Some accuse these countries of violating the international norm of non-appropriation in space. The two countries rebut that there are many asteroids that can be exploited and that they do not claim sovereignty or ownership over celestial bodies. With the imminent return of manned missions to the Moon and the establishment of a lunar village, the question arises whether the first to arrive will be the only ones to benefit from the scarce resources that exist on this celestial body, such as water resources. Unilaterally, the United States produced a document called the Artemis Accords and invited the governments of other countries to commit to a set of guidelines for activities on the Moon, Mars, asteroids, and comets. This document is not a legally binding treaty, but in October 2020, the governments of 8 countries agreed to follow the principles of these accords. These accords say that the rule of non-appropriation in space will be respected, but it mentions that signatories can establish safety zones for activities that represent a risk to others. The size of these safety zones is susceptible to be altered. What will happen when the first comers declare the first safety zones? Or build fences on the Moon? Can this be considered as a way of appropriating a territory and exercising effective control? Can this be considered as violating the Outer Space Treaty, committing an internationally wrongful act? We are at the point in history where humankind, as part of its evolution, is preparing to establish human settlements beyond the orbits of the Earth. Technical progress and human exploration cannot be stopped. The question arises how to conduct such activities in a manner acceptable to the international community and not just to benefit a few. If we are going to populate celestial bodies and to exploit their natural resources, the first step is to coordinate such efforts internationally instead of taking unilateral actions. Now, you are aware. If someone offers you and you buy a piece of land on a distant planet at the end of the universe, you are definitely losing your money. But don't be disappointed. Although you cannot own a location in the vacuum of space or a piece of land on a celestial body, you still can build and own a restaurant at the end of the universe. And you are even entitled to make reasonable use of the local natural resources, like water, for the operation of your business. This is fully in line with the Outer Space Treaty that declares that outer space, including the moon and the other celestial bodies, is the province of all mankind. So, outer space already belongs to you.